It's interesting to have a sit-down talk. My part-time job, I think of it as show and tell, because I go to universities and museums to talk about my work, but I'm always standing up in front of like big crowds, so to sit here and talk is a nice change. So as Harlan said, my name is Willie Cole. I'm from the great state of New Jersey, and I try to show as much as I can, maybe for a long time, maybe for about 40 years now. And, just trying to keep it going, always looking for more. So because of that, and because I know there's so many artists in the world, every generation has their different heroes, I always start with things to show my inspirations and how I got from being emerging Willie to mid-career Willie. Okay. So I had a big interest in African art, all through college, because I grew up in the 60s and African awareness was a big deal in the black community. So our local museum, the Newark Museum, had lots of African art. So that's my dominant inspiration to this day. But it really became magical when I discovered a steam iron that got run over by a car on the street. It was this same kind of iron. It's completely flattened and crashed up. Up to that point, I was pretty much a painter and a graphic designer. But when I saw that iron, it looked like a mask from Liberia, the Dan mask. So it led me to start thinking of myself as an archaeological ethnographic Dadaist, because I felt I was discovering cultures, ancient cultures in the city of Newark through modern appliances. And the first one I found was the iron. I have to put the mic down to go here and talk about this, but I do have the ability to speak loudly. We'll see. So, people always ask me, how I come up with the concepts. And I actually spent 20 years making art only out of steam irons. And it had to do with a list of words that I made when I found the first iron. So I tried to first absorb the physical quality of the iron. Like it had a black handle, and a silver bottom, and it had a shape. In my personal history, my great-grandmother worked as a domestic, so my first association with the iron was housework and domestic labor. So it led me to make images or pieces that reflect the iron as a tool for a servant. But I knew the history of that came from slavery. So now I can make things with the iron that spoke about slavery and servitude. And of course, I knew that slavery in the U.S. was fed by the African slave trade. So it tied a really big history, personal as well as a social, into the steam iron. But the shape was like a boat. So I began to make boats out of irons. But I wanted to tie these together so this boat became the slave ship. And I made slave ships out of iron. Of course, in the 50s, every modern housewife wanted the latest appliances. So on this side, I have the modern housewife. Not modern today, but modern at that time. I knew that her whole life took place in a house, even though she worked there sometimes ironing for her. But in some cases, she did her own ironing. And I knew it would take money to have that. But I also knew that this slave trade brought a lot of money into this country, pretty much built this whole country. So the iron at that point became an object that opened the door to me to express social and cultural awareness. But it also had a scientific basis. And I recognized the elements of iron. I think it's 30 protons, 20 neutrons. That was a symbol for that. I knew that steam iron involved several natural elements, one being water, one being heat. So I took those three things and graduated to the spiritual level, because I'm speaking about, African culture or African Americans' evolution from the continent of Africa to the present day, and recognizing that these natural elements all have spiritual counterparts in the religion of West Africa and the European tradition. So I have Yemeya, who is the goddess or Orisha of water. I have Ogun, who's the god of iron. And I have Shango, who is the god of fire or thunder. So all of these things mixed up allowed me to make art about irons for 20 years. changed my life. So prior to that, I was just another painter in the neighborhood. Thank you. So that's kind of like a history for me. I haven't done that in a long time. But you can see the irons have so many different kinds of patterns on the bottom. So the patterns for me became tribal marks, whereas each brand was a tribe. And in the 80s, branding was popular. My son was like, he was Fila. You know, you may have been Gap or Sassoon. So I was very into the concept of branding because it was very popular. So I started making scorches as brands. You know, a big fan of double entendres. You got the brand, you got branding. It's the same word. And so I branded myself by using the steam iron as a brand to make a brand based on a brand on an ironing board. And the result was domestic shields. Every iron became a tribe. So there was a tribe called the Sunbeams, the Silexes, the Black & Deckers, you know, all the popular iron brands that we have today. But now there are a lot of new irons. There's European imports that look like sports cars and sneakers. But I use most of the irons from the 50s and 60s. So this was my first big show in New York, and this was like maybe 1988 or 89. And this gallery still represents me today. So I began to scorch on paper, on canvas, and on wood. With wood, I would use a forge or an open fire. With paper and canvas, I'd use a hot plate. Take the iron apart completely and just use the bottom, which is called the soul plate, which is good for me too, since I want to find spirituality in art. So soul, soul, and soul, 3 meanings there. So this piece is called Zulu in Silex, because it looks like the Zulu shields, but it's really a Proctor Silex steam iron. And I thought about the wars between the Zulus and the British, and how the landscape must have been littered with shields after the British killed all the Zulus. So this kind of represents that for me. And this is on canvas. So that was like the 80s. And I hadn't done any iron stuff since then. You know, I did scorching and things out of irons up until probably 1998. And I had a show at the Museum of Modern Art in 98 all about my steam iron scorching stuff. So I felt at that moment that that's the time to change, that scorching dies after this show. You know? But I have a dealer in Birmingham who wanted scorches for my show there last year. So I made these pieces for him. And these were inspired by a Japanese woodblock artist named Hokusai. He had a piece called The Sparrow Dance that I always loved. So this is called 5 Stances of Domestic Defense. And this is scorched on paper. So this is done right on the stove. And that's a close-up of one of them. Each one is 18 by 24. So the show at MoMA was actually called Innovation in Printmaking. So through that show, I'm always invited to do prints at print studios. And I tell you, I didn't know anything about printmaking at all. But you know, they laid it on me, and I went with it. I was a keynote speaker at some national printmaking competition or conference in New Orleans 2 years ago, and I just came back from Hawaii judging an international printmakers contest. But I only can judge it aesthetically. I don't really know the techniques. But fortunately, they always assign a master printer to work with me. So this image of the Brooks slave ship exists in many history books. And I had it in a book in my studio in 1994 when I was about to move out of that studio. And finding this image in the book led me to make this piece here. So now the ironing board is the slave ship. And the tribes that are in there, their brands are all around. I think of this as my thesis piece, because this is the piece that got this show at MoMA for me. And this piece is in every major museum now. It was a small edition size, maybe about 12. But the 12 major museums in this country all have it. So one of those life-changing works of art for me. It is a woodblock print, and everything is real size. So the ironing board is the object's actually embedded into a wooden piece of plywood. And so it's all real size stuff. Now, I have friends, a lot of friends who are artists, and I noticed that Cindy Sherman and Matthew Barney, I don't know if any of you all know them, because I know there's new generations here, but they all include themselves in their work. So I decided to do the same thing. So I made myself into the domestic warrior. So on the left, I am dressed in the Silex ritual costume. And on the right, I'm dressed in the Sunbeam ceremonial costume. All through the magic of Photoshop. I don't have any tattoos at this time. I had the great pleasure of having a show at the Gray Gallery on Fifth Avenue in New York 2 years ago. And they had like a 20-foot, maybe a 2 or 3 story window on the side of the building. And they took one of these images and blew them up like giant size on Fifth Avenue. So that whole year, my daughter would tease me and say that I started my year naked on Fifth Avenue. But yeah, I guess this was my son's favorite toy. My oldest son is 36 years old, and he played with the first generation of Transformers. So I was a painter, when he was a little boy. But when he brought this into my studio and turned it into a gun and then a card and all that stuff, it just blew me away. And I decided at that moment I would start making sculpture. So I would take irons apart and reassemble them into various kind of time-crushing robotic forms, because I see it as representing the past, the present, and the future. Like the material itself is from the present, but the look is from the past and the future at the same time. I think I have a couple of these. This one's called American Beauty. I would always name them after the products. So the 2 breasts here, or the pair of breasts here, are from the American Beauty iron. So that's how I got the name American Beauty. This one might be hard for you to see. I realize that, because I live in a studio with all this junk, I see it very easily. But you may just see a stack of irons there. But this is actually a man on a horseback. So I don't know if you see it. And it's based on the Dogon man on horseback sculptures. You'll find it in many African art museums. The Dogon from Mali. So while I was making my way through Newark as the Iron Man, in New Jersey, where my studio was, I was making things out of hair dryers because I'd found like thousands of them in a factory down the street from my studio. So I think this is the only example I have of a hair dryer mask. But I could not figure out how to make a standing thing, so I photographed the hair dryer, cut the pieces out, and just sent them as a collage to make standing pieces. And that led to this one here, which is also in lots of museums around the country here. This was my first so-called artist print. It says silkscreen print. So religion, spirituality, and mythology have played a big role in my work. There's probably supposed to be a video there that's not showing, so I'm just going to skip it. And it's kind of a long story. I'm going to try to keep it brief, but there is, in the U.S. history, something called a lawn jockey. I realize that some people who are under 40 don't know what a lawn jockey is. But a lawn jockey is perceived to be a very racist symbol in the U.S. But I was drawn to it because I read a book by an author named Myra Darren called The Divine Horseman. And she was a choreographer and a filmmaker who went to Haiti and did research on voodoo and ritual dancing. So her title, The Divine Horseman, refers to the divine horsemen of the gods and the people who are in the ceremony of the horses. So if you're in a ceremony, your goal is to be ridden by a horse. If you're in the Christian church, you want to feel the Holy Spirit. If you're in the Pentecostal church, you want to catch the Holy Spirit. You want to jump up and down and go crazy. So the practitioners are the horses and the gods are the divine horsemen. So in the particular ceremonies of Haiti and West Africa, there's a god named Elegba who's been in a few pop songs. He was in a song by Talking Heads by David Byrne, and the lyric was Papa Legba, open the door. And he was in American Horror Story, the TV series, but portrayed in a very negative way because they wanted to make it horrible. But the essence is that in the religion, Elegba is the same as Jesus Christ. They both share the symbol of the cross. They both open the gate for you. You got to approach God in Christianity, you have to, in Jesus' name, amen.
So in these, I guess you call them kind of Yoruba-based religions, but they, through the slave trade, they're all over the country, especially in South America and Latin America. But you have to approach Ilegba before you can reach one of the higher gods. So I made my Ilegba a lawn jockey because the lawn jockey brings the horse to the rider. He doesn't ride the horse in the race, he brings the horse to the rider. And his colors are the same as the Ilegba colors, red, black, and white. So this painting is about that. He's opening the gate and bringing the horse in. So it's kind of like codified meanings here. And I haven't really painted since the 80s. But in my last show in New York, which I think was January of last year, I made these 3 paintings. The first one was called Special Delivery. That's about, I think it's 9 feet tall, maybe 5 feet wide, or wider than that maybe. This one's called Delivery Boy. And this one was called With His Blessings and His Curse. Because in order to feel the Holy Spirit in any religion, you have to totally submit to it. So that's why the horse is submitting. But the Ilegba character has 2 forms, the dark side and the bright side. So those are just stuck in there. This was a gate about the same thing, because Ilegba opens the gate, to provide the blessings. So this is an Ilegba gate made out of wood. And I think this will be back to sculpture. I know I'm here as a sculptor, but that just happened to be in there. So in sculpture, I got to the point where I was very interested in multiplying single objects. And again, my son played the role here because he had about 9 pairs of sneakers he gave me. And I sewed them together. I didn't have enough to make what I had in mind. So I went to my local thrift store and discovered high-heeled shoes. And there were more shoes than there were sneakers, and they were so beautiful. It's also the era of Imelda Marcos, who was the wife of Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines. I don't know if that was George Bush or Ronald Reagan, but chased him out of his palace by having the military play loud rock music outside until he couldn't take the sound anymore. He came out. But this is his wife, Imelda, who was known for her shoe collection and her love of disco music. There's a play in New York about her now. So that was inspiration. And Arcimboldo, who did the 4 Seasons, like this one with the vegetables, he's done it with fruit, with plates. That became an inspiration. And then during an artist talk at Brown University, I saw a show called The Art of Transformation, The Art of Tibet, and that became an inspiration. So when you look at these next sculptures, you can see all that inspiration here from shoes. This one is called With My Heart in My Hand. So I got a silver heart in my hand there. But I recognize that some of the things are cartoony as well. And I guess because my first drawing lessons in life were sitting in front of TV drawing the cartoons. So this shows how I put them together, the shoe things here, adding a pair at a time. But, I want to take it as far as I can, because to me this is a business, so I then make a drawing of it. And then I make a print from the drawing, and an animation from the print. So try to get as much mileage out of every idea as I can. But this is how the piece looks itself. This is called, what's her name? This is shoe designer in repose. I forget her name. It's not Anne Klein, but it's blah, blah, blah in repose, whatever the designer's name is. So, but it's, I think this is called the Jan figure when it has 2 sides, 2 faces. So this is one side, and this is the other side. And this is the print. The print is 4x8, one single piece of plywood. And, I showed you Arcimboldo head, so I've made lots of heads transforming the shoes. This is the front and back view of Soul Brother number 1. For many years, I would name all the pieces, the female pieces, after females, because there's a lot of female power there. But I was a big James Brown fan, so when he died, I decided I had to name one Soul Brother number 1. since that was his title. But I also have Soul Brother number 2. This is the first one where I actually use platform shoes for teeth. I've used the stilettos for most of the teeth over the years. And I started making these, I think, maybe around 1995. I might have made 2 or 3. I made a chair out of shoes. And I made one wall-mounted mask. It was just the front to hang on the wall. But in 2005, I had a fellowship at the University of Georgia. And I didn't want to take all of my stuff down there. And at that time, I wasn't making out of the shoes. I was, I don't know what I was doing now that I think about it. But I found a thrift store in Georgia, and I made a deal with them to buy all their high heel shoes for 50 cents a pound. So I ended up with thousands of shoes, and I still have maybe even 1 million. I still have a lot of them left over today. So this is called the Zebra Town Trophy Mask. I have my shoes divided by color in the studio and in textures. I have a bin of black and whites, a bin of animal patterns, a bin of stilettos, a bin of kitten heels. So I can usually, like shop in a supermarket, you got so many kinds of apples to choose from. So it's kind of like that. This is called Man's Best Friend, because I feel a man's best friend should be his woman. And so many positive and negative attributes related to women and canines. And I think you all know what I mean. So I decided to make Man's Best Friend from those shoes. This is called Le Chien d'Angelou. It was actually called Man's Best Friend 1, but the collector that purchased it said to me, "Why don't you call it Le Chien d'Angelou?" So I said, "Okay, I'll do that." It didn't really matter that much to me. So these shoes, I didn't get them in the big hall, but I was looking for a studio space. I went into an industrial building, and on the loft on the first floor, there was this shoe seller selling wholesale. And all of the shelves are empty except for one shelf with these things on them. So I got 100 pair of these red and white shoes from him. And these are canvas shoes as opposed to leather. I forget what this one is called, but I think of it as a cat frog. And this came about because I found a dead frog between my front door and my storm door one winter when I was out of the country. I came back. So I got the body of the frog and I put it in a plastic container, a Tupperware container, and I washed it over the weeks dry out so I could see the skeletal form of it. And it led to this. So those were all like made from shoes, but this is actually made from shoes but cast in bronze. Like I said, I think of the art thing as a business, so I realized if I can make one shoe sculpture and sell that, for a fair amount of money, if I made it in editions, I could sell more of them and have a bigger payday with the same amount of work. So I started about 3 years ago casting them in bronze. So this is called the Downtown Goddess. I think it's about 3 feet tall. And I am still using those Elegba colors because they're also in a lot of traditions in West Africa, but also among some of the Native American tribes. The colors of the warriors are going to be red, black, and white. But also when I was a graphic designer, I was told that the strongest colors for graphic design were red, black, and white back in the 70s. So I still use those. And I always make one in bronze. So I got the little Louboutin soles there. Try to keep it contemporary. I make them in editions of 7. This is called Shinufu because in West Africa there is a nation called Shinufo, and I have one of their carvings in my own collection. So that inspired this piece here. This was just done last year, and I like these when I find new things. Like the fact I have this shoe wrapped around in a body like that. I've never done that before. So that was exciting to me. And here I have the heel poked into the toe of that one. That was new innovation for me as well. I didn't do anything here, but it had all those holes in the face already, in the shoe. I just put wire in them to keep them open. And then the whole thing is cast in bronze. This one is called The Soul Sitter. This is actually the first bronze piece I made. I made an actual shoe size, and it was called The Warrior, Worrier. And it's sold out so quickly that I convinced my gallery to make a big one. So we made this one 6 feet tall just last year. But one of my collectors said nobody wants a 6 foot tall warrior, so change the name of it. So I call this one The Soul Sitter, S-O-L-E Sitter. And this will all be from the last 2 years here, because I've been thinking of multiplication, but really focusing on it more rather than using a variety of the same kind of object, but not the exact object, whereas now I'm into using the exact object. So I've collected millions of water bottles, and I made this car for a show 2 years ago. This is the back view of the car. You can see it over there behind my truck there. I call it the 2012 H2O. And it's fully equipped. It's got detailed interior. This is the 2013 H2O TBR. TBR stands for to be recycled. And the difference, I guess, in the two is that this one has this nice fastback. The other one didn't have that. And it's got some different kind of wheel wells. This is downtown in Summit, New Jersey, across from City Hall. You know, I wish I had some other photos here, because this piece was in Summit, New Jersey last winter, and it was a bad winter. So you see how it looks there, nice and straight. By the end of the winter, I have to show you this. It started out like this. By the end of the winter, it was like this. But it looked like it was in motion to me. I liked it a lot like that, but the city didn't. So it really did become TBR. I took it apart. It's in plastic bags now. This is a detail of a piece that is called the Buddha Chandelier. Because I had a dream about a Buddha in every bottle. And I decided to make that. This is the original piece. And the original piece was actually called E Pluribus Unum, just trying to deal with the oneness of everything, you know, believing that everything is one thing. Like we're sitting here in a room full of people and tables and chairs, but we're really just sitting in a room of one thing multiplied. You know, it's the vibrations that hold things together in units and make everything look different. But there's only one thing, really. You know, like cell replication kind of thing. So that's what this piece is about. This is 12 feet across and 15 feet down. And this is 2,000 bottles, but it's hollow inside. So this is actually a shot of it looking from the top inside. And that was my very first chandelier. But since then, I've been addicted to chandeliers. So now I make them solid. So this is also 2,000 bottles, but it's totally solid. It's made different than the other one. You can see here I have these 12-gauge wires going through all the bottles. So it's many strands strategically cut and hung from a mesh to make that look. And this one is made customizable. If you see I have a loop at the bottom of each bottle and a cap on the bottom, that means that if I want to, I can add another bottle there and put a photograph in the bottle to make it a whole new piece. But this is this was an installation called From Water to Light. It's at a firehouse in New Jersey. So there are 2 rooms here that are 15 by 15. And there's a 3-foot hallway between the rooms here. And each room has a chandelier in it. So this chandelier back here is the real Buddha chandelier. And this one here is just the plain one I showed you earlier that's customizable. This whole installation is 10,000 bottles. So this is another installation I did for a nonprofit gallery in the city of Newark. It doesn't have a title, but it's just a room. I think the room was it's like office cubicle, just filled with bottles. So I had it in the gallery, but after the opening, I allowed people to jump inside and swim around. So here you can see some people in it having a good time. Like, I don't know about in Vermont, and I can share from all over the country, but in New Jersey we have IKEA, and they have a ballroom where little kids go and jump in and pull the balls. So it's kind of like that, but it's all bottles. So they had a good time there. But the bottles also took me to Colombia. The end of last year, I think in early December, I went to South America to participate in the Cartagena Biennial. Cartagena was the cocaine capital for a long time. They're trying to redeem themselves, They got rid of drug cartels, and they have a big biennial now. This is their first one. And of course, I couldn't take all this stuff with me, so we thought we'd make it down there. But the funny thing is that here in the U.S., I go to Home Depot and I can buy a roll of chicken wire. But in Cartagena, they made the chicken wire for me. They didn't have it in stores. And also I use a 12-gauge galvanized wire, which I buy a bundle in Home Depot. But here they didn't have that. They just had it on a roll, and we had to hammer it flat. So it was interesting. It forced me to not be so anal, because I want everything perfect and by the number, but they were actually hammering everything by hand, and nothing was quite the same. So this is my crew that helped me. So I was there for 2 weeks making the pieces, and I went back to the opening. So here they are preparing the bottles. Another thing is that all the bottle pieces before this were made out of recycled bottles, because recycling was a big part of these concepts. But my sponsor in Colombia was a bottle manufacturer, so I had all new bottles. So these guys are putting the holes in the bottles for me here. And rather than Buddha in a bottle, I discovered that every home in Cartagena had this baby Christ, Niños Divino. So just to be relevant in the community I was in, I decided to put that in every bottle instead. So we did some with that. We did one chandelier with the Virgin Mary. You can't really see her well on the bottom, but those are the Holy Mother ones. And it took us 2 weeks to make 2 chandeliers. Happy crew. See, the wire's not perfectly straight there like it is when I buy them Home Depot. But eventually, we got it together. So there I am as Vanna White, presenting it to you. I like the environment that it's in. It used to be a nunnery or something like that, so they had really, not hallways, but gangways, really wide spaces. So this is pretty sequential now. So that Columbia show, I think, was in March, and in April, I was back in the bottle studio making spools of bottles, 900 bottles on a spool, which we then took to a park, and we wrapped them around this frame here, up to 16 feet. I had 3 guys helping me. I thought it would be easy, like the guy with the stick in his hands. I thought we'd all be like that, just dancing around the pole, having like a fun day. But it took a lot more to do it. We made it to the top. We want to have at least 2 layers on it. So we continued for a couple of weeks, and we ended up with this. I call it 10,000 Reasons. I used to call it Vortex, but last winter in New Jersey there was a winter vortex. So I decided to change the name to 10,000 Reasons because it's 10,000 bottles. So 10,000 reasons to recycle, etc., etc. So this is in Summit, New Jersey. Summit, New Jersey, if anybody is interested, they have a public art program. They don't pay for your materials, but they'll pay for installation of the piece. And they're open. Every year they get new work in there. You can leave there for a year. So I had this in my mind, so I said, I'm going to do it. So I hired 4 guys. I rented a building to work on it in, and they paid for the installation of it. And the whole process just blew me away. So I think that's my last image. So thank you very much.